We've been talking a lot about top free agents for the Giants to pursue, and do I have a personal blind spot to Carlos Correa? That's one of the many questions we're going to get to today next.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily San Francisco Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Giants, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. My name is Ben Caspick, and on this show we provide daily episodes Monday through Friday talking about the San Francisco Giants in a way that's data-driven and rational, but also simple, passionate, and accessible to all. I'm a former contributor for the baseball statistics and analysis websites Beyond the Box Score and Rotographs. I've been podcasting about the Giants since 2015, and I'm a lifelong fan. Thanks for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get podcasts. And coming up on today's show, it is a mailbag edition of the show. Thank you so much to everyone who submitted questions on Twitter. The first one comes from Enrique, and Roroni also checks in on this topic. Enrique says, Carlos Correa to the Giants. He hates the Dodgers. The Dodgers hate him, the leader the Giants need. And then Ruroni says, you're the man, Ben, thank you, but you have a blind spot when it comes to Correa. He's the best option for us outside of Judge. Perfect fit. So I thought this was interesting, and thank you for pointing out the blind spot, perhaps. I mean, I think you're right to an extent, and let me give you a little bit of backstory on my opinions on Carlos Correa. I was a huge fan of Carlos Correa. I thought he was one of the best young players in baseball before the Astros cheating scandal stuff came out. And after that, it just kind of tainted my opinion of him. And seeing the way he kind of handled the media and just handled the negativity towards the Astros from fans and all the booing and all that, and that he just took on this kind of persona of almost like they were the victims in it, and that like he was just defensive about it. I don't know. I can't really describe it. You'd have to see some of what he was saying. He just, like, they were the ones who were like, oh, it's us against the world, you know, instead of just being truly regretful and truly kind of owning up to it. It seemed more of, you know, now we're the only ones in our corner and we're going to have to take all of you on, the world. I don't know. That's kind of the way I read into it. And so for sure, my perspective of Correa changed a lot when that came out. The fact is, a lot of teams were doing something not quite trash can level, but like reading in, you know, using video cameras to zoom in on catcher signals and then decoding the set of signs and then relaying those sets of signs to the runners who would then relay it to the hitters. I know that sounds complicated, and what the Astros were doing was worse than that, but still, they weren't the only team doing something. They were doing the worst thing as far as we know, but other teams, so maybe I'm just too wrapped up in the Astros, but I take that stuff seriously, and he was kind of a leader in that whole operation from what I understand. And so when I do have, if it's just performance on the field, then yeah, I mean, he is a perfect fit in a lot of ways. He's the youngest free agent out there. He just turned 28 years old 5 days ago. So he is young. He is good. He's a good defensive shortstop. The numbers, he's a good defensive shortstop. He's a very good hitter. And has a track record of being really good in the playoffs. He was like always a difference maker. I mean, his career postseason weighted runs created plus is 130, and regular season weighted runs created plus is 129. So I think that whole kind of postseason steps up in the biggest moments. Sometimes they're just good, you know, in the postseason, and they're good in the regular season. Pitching is better, but still similar numbers there. So in conclusion, I mean, the Dodgers thing you mentioned is a good point. He hates them and they hate him because it was the 2017 World Series in which the Dodgers were doing, I mean, the Astros were doing this and the regular season. But so they kind of cheated the Dodgers out of a World Series title. So it would definitely spice up the rivalry. And when all is said and done, I wouldn't throw a fit if the Giants ended up signing Carlos Correa. I just think there are other really good players out there. I mean, Judge, like you said, best outside of Judge. Well, I don't know. I don't know how exactly you make the case that Correa is a better fit than Trea Turner. I think that Trea Turner, he doesn't have these potential character issues that we're talking about with Correa, simply associated with the cheating stuff. And he's also faster. Correa is not a fast runner. Trea Turner is a difference-making runner. And, I mean, Correa certainly has great athleticism, but Turner is just kind of a difference-making speed player, and he's just as big of a bat, if not a bigger bat. They do it in different ways, but I really like the bat of Trea Turner. So over the last 3 years, just by way of example, Correa has a 129 weighted runs created plus, and Trea Turner is at 139. And so, look, they're both really good players. Correa, somebody pointed this out on last week's mailbag. I'm not sure I got to it, but it's a really good point. Correa has shown a willingness to sign with whatever team offers him the most money. And that's not always the case. Like Trea Turner, he's had these comments about wanting to be on the East Coast, maybe. He's at least hinted that that's his preference. But for Correa, I think if you just make him the best offer, he'll sign with you. And so that represents a unique opportunity for a team like the Giants that sometimes just has players choose another city, even if maybe it's a little bit less money. Although you've got to factor in state income tax and all that, which makes it so you have to overpay even more for it to come out as an equal proposition there. So anyway, it is complicated, but for sure, he's a guy who should be a target. I'm just saying, if I had a choice and you're similar in talent, I'm going to take somebody else just because of what I mentioned there. So coming up in just a minute, a really interesting question about should the Giants let Carlos Rodón walk and use that money to spend on more position player talent because they've had such a good track record of finding kind of undervalued pitchers and turning them into really good pitchers. So we'll get into that momentarily, but first, BetOnline.net is your number one source for football betting info this season. Find all the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, and in-depth articles and analysis on every game you can find. And as always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all your sports wagering information, from live betting and up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there. The fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite games and events, including MLB, MMA, boxing, and golf. We discussed this the other day, but speaking of these top free agents, BetOnline keeps putting out updated odds for where these top MLB free agents are going to land. And I do think it's always interesting to take a look. And, you know, we have the knowledge that the chairman of the Giants, Greg Johnson, as well as Farhan Zaidi, are making strong hints that they might play at the top of the free agent market. And if you see some of the odds, it doesn't necessarily reflect that. So perhaps an opportunity that you can check out when you head to betonline.net or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, as promised, more questions and answers. The first one coming from Baseball Fan 5, who says, suppose the Giants don't re-sign Rodón. Who are some realistic fallback options outside of Verlander and DeGrom? Maybe a one-year prove-it deal for Sean Manaea. They have Kyle Harrison and Landon Roop, who look close and could debut next year too. The Giants have a strong track record of helping pitchers. Due to pitcher volatility and risk of injury, I'd much rather throw $10 to $12 million at Manaea on 1 year than $120 million on Rodón if it means landing 2 elite bats. So actually, I hadn't thought of it in these terms, but that is a really good question in my opinion. And I think that you're right in that, I mean, when we think about Kevin Gausman, when he was brought here, it was a 1 year, $9 million deal, the first year to bring him in. And Anthony DeSclafani last year was a 1 year, $6 million deal. And Alex Wood in his first year, 1 year, $3 million. And, you know, Jacob Junis this year, not as effective, but still pretty good. And Tyler Anderson, not great, but still pretty good. So they do, especially with Gausman. And I mean, even Rodón, it was a 1 year, 2 year guarantee, but they got a short-term deal for a guy with huge upside. You say outside of Verlander and DeGrom, those might be the guys that I prefer, and you could still do it this way. But it's a good point that if you're going to limit your spending to whatever, like if you're so good at finding these pitchers and making them really good and getting the most out of them, should you just splurge on the position player side and just continue to do what they've done on the pitching side? And also, like you said, you do need to maintain space for younger players like Kyle Harrison. So, I mean, the first part of your question are who are some what was the exact words who are some realistic fallback options? So there's 54 free agent starting pitchers that I count here. I didn't have time I would need to go in on each and every one. They tend to, like the guys like Gausman, the numbers weren't good, but what they like is kind of the stuff, right? He had a really good fastball, a good splitter, and maybe needed to focus on throwing the splitter more and kind of ditching the less effective pitches. So I'd have to look at every guy and every pitch and all that. But the guys just scrolling through who stood out to me to an extent: Tyler Anderson, although I think he'll get more than a 1-year deal; Chris Bassett; Matt Boyd, who they signed basically to this type of deal coming into the year. And it took him longer than they anticipated to get healthy, but now he is pitching for the Mariners. And I think that they could absolutely bring him back and kind of do the same thing. Similar deal, and just hope that this time he's healthy. But he's a name out there. Andrew Heaney is a guy who's perpetually, teams are trying to fix him. Dodgers, he had a lot of success early, but the home run ball has kind of bit him lately. And maybe the home run is a little bit more protected at Oracle Park. So Andrew Heaney is definitely a guy to look out for. Sean Manaea, I agree. Like, if you feel like you can fix him, then yeah, he makes a lot of sense. And Jameson Taillon, I didn't even look at his recent numbers, but he's a guy I've always liked. Ground ball guy. They do like ground ball guys. And I don't know, I didn't even pull up his numbers, so he may be having a bad season as far as I don't know. But those are just some of the initial names that came to mind. But yes, if you believe that you can get the most out of one or two of these guys and they can be good for you, I concur that if it means, only if, like I'm not saying just save the money and don't sign Rodón. If you instead, if he leaves, but then you devote money you would have spent on him to signing an impact bat, plus you already were planning to sign an impact bat, and you combine it and you get two of them, I do think that that's probably a better way to go. So good question. Next question comes from Red Fox Pyro, who says, would it be a smarter offseason plan to leave the infield alone, assuming you bring back Belt and Longoria, and then add 2 everyday outfielders? Maybe Judge and Nimmo. VR, Longoria, J.D. Davis, Tyro Estrada, Brandon Crawford, Brandon Belt, Wilmer Flores, Casey Schmidt, and Isan Diaz as your depth chart is a solid infield. So I can see where you're coming from, but at the same time, I do think that with the track record of injury with Brandon Belt and Evan Longoria, I do have a hard time seeing them bringing back both of those guys. I think that I've said this kind of on record that I think maybe one of them comes back, but I have a hard time seeing both. And there's so many really good, like most of the really good position players who are out there in free agency are shortstops. There's Aaron Judge, and then there's like 4 or 5 shortstops. And so I don't necessarily think it'd be the smarter offseason plan. They should absolutely explore the market for all of those guys. I would happily welcome Carlos Correa if it meant either Carlos Correa or none of these impact shortstops. I'd rather have Correa for sure. Go get Correa and Judge, boom. I would be thrilled with that. Absolutely thrilled. I know some of you listening think it's completely unrealistic, and it probably is if you're expecting 2, but I really do believe one of these top guys ends up with the Giants, and I hope I'm right. If I'm wrong, I'm going to be upset. But when I talk about the top guys, we're talking about Aaron Judge and the shortstops. And the shortstops are Xander Bogaerts, Carlos Correa, Dansby Swanson, and Trea Turner. I'm saying one of those 5 guys ends up with the Giants. And so if you're just saying, if it's Judge, then maybe you don't get another superstar unless we're listening to Baseball Fan 5 and saying, okay, let's not sign Rodón and then use that money to go get one of these other guys, fantastic. I think that could absolutely work because they've got a pretty strong rotation as it is. And I don't know. I mean, losing Rodón would be a big loss. He's been one of the best pitchers in the league. So, but I don't know. I wouldn't just rule out signing all of these really good shortstops for no good reason. I would definitely keep them on the agenda there. Thomas says top offseason target not named Judge. And to me, it's Trea Turner, simply because of what I said. The athleticism, the personality, I think, is a fit. He's kind of low key, which does fit in with the Giants. He's certainly not like a rah-rah, look at me guy. Carlos Correa, a little bit of a look at me guy. But sometimes that can be a good thing. It's one of those guys you don't really like when you're playing them, but when they're on your team, you love it. But Trea Turner, just the difference-making speed, athleticism, he just kind of is the opposite of what the Giants have been like the last couple of years when it's been a problem. So for me, it's Trea Turner, but it's really any one of those guys I would be happy with, the guys I just mentioned. So coming up in just a minute, what are the odds that Casey Schmidt, who was recently promoted to AAA, actually comes up and debuts for the Giants in 2023? And what is the outfield plan if they don't get Aaron Judge? Because they need some help in the outfield. All that in just a minute. But first, all right, as promised, B. Craw Enjoyer says odds of Casey Schmidt coming up next season. I think the odds are high. I mean, if I had to put a precise percentage on it, 75%, because he's going to start the year in AAA. Like, I don't see why he wouldn't. He did very well in AA, and he was promoted to AAA like 3 days ago. And so I don't see any reason why he wouldn't start in AAA. And if he's in AAA, and if he's performing well, they're going to call him up. That's what they do. They've given guys an opportunity if they perform well enough, like David Villar. But the difference is David Villar like really hit, but they didn't, and they still called him up, but it took a while. But part of the reason was he wasn't an impact defender like Casey Schmidt is. So if Schmidt is hitting and he's, the defense, I would imagine, is not going to go away, right? It's not something that slumps as easily as hitting. And yeah, I would imagine that they give him a look. Yet another reason that I'm not so sure you necessarily want to bring back an Evan Longoria, or at least not Belt and Longoria, because part of their whole MO here is to, like, on the one hand, you want the players who are producing, but on the other hand, they really want to continuously create space and make sure they're leaving room for young players to establish themselves, to give them a real opportunity. And so if you just lock in, I mean, maybe that's part of the question we just talked about with the infield depth chart. If you sign a Trea Turner, I mean, still third base would be pretty open, right? You've got J.D. Davis and Wilmer Flores and David Villar in the mix there, but also Casey Schmidt would enter the mix there. And so I think that could be a pretty good thing. And so, yeah, I do believe he's in line to make his major league debut in 2023, as are other guys like Kyle Harrison. So it's exciting. Finally, some of this top prospect talent is getting closer to the majors, and we could actually see an impact arrival in 2023. So the next question comes from Roroni again, who says, what is the plan in the outfield after Judge returns to the Yankees? So we often get these questions that are so certain of something. And I mean, yeah, I would, if I was betting on this, I would definitely think that the Yankees are the favorites to bring back Judge. And so let's just assume he goes back. What is the plan for the outfield? Well, let's keep in mind that Thairo Estrada has been playing a lot in the outfield recently, and I think that that's relevant. And when we talk about all the talent in the free agent market and how a lot of them are shortstops, some of these guys can move to second base or third base, right? Like, I think Correa could play third. Xander Bogaerts could potentially play third. They could also play second. And Trea Turner did play second last year when he was with the Dodgers, and Corey Seager was the shortstop. So the fact that Estrada, who was like the everyday second baseman, has more and more been playing left field, I think is a big not red flag, but just something to pay attention to. Because I mean, he could be a part of that outfield mix if they go out and sign one of these shortstops, and Crawford is still under contract. then let's just say, I mean, I think Thairo Estrada can be an everyday player. And so let's just say he's in left. I do believe that they're going to keep Mike Yastrzemski and Austin Slater. And so there's a platoon at one other position, call it center, because Slater and Yaz are more than capable of playing center. And then that would just leave you needing really one everyday outfielder. And I do believe there's Brandon Nimmo, who makes a lot of sense, fast, at least this year has been a good defender, can hit lefties, can hit righties, patient at the plate, doesn't chase out of the zone, energetic guy. I think he makes a lot of sense for the Giants, as I've said repeatedly. Another name to watch is Mitch Haniger. Local guy. They do seem to value bringing in players who are from the area. I don't know if he grew up a Giants fan or not, but Mitch Haniger is local. He's not having a great year, so it could be kind of one of these buy low situations. After a long tenure in Seattle, he had some freak injuries in Seattle, but he is a guy who's out there. He has had issues defensively at times. The last couple years have not been great defensively in the outfield for Mitch Haniger. I'm looking through. I mean, this year he's at +2 defensive runs saved and 0 outs above average. Last year, -7 outs above average. But in his whole career, 4,400 innings in the outfield, just -5 outs above average and +16 defensive runs saved. So actually, seems like he can be a pretty decent outfielder. He is a little bit older. He's going to turn 32 in December, so I wouldn't want to give a super long-term deal here. Maybe even just a 1-year deal, 2-year deal with an option. Maybe, I don't know. Mitch Haniger is just a name to watch. The outfield market is pretty thin. Besides Judge, Nimmo, and Haniger, there's Jock Peterson, Trey Mancini. Is he an outfielder? I don't really think so. So it's kind of, there's a lot of names, but I don't really see any of them as huge fits. And so it might just be one guy and then depth around them in the form of, you can bring back Lamont Wade. You can bring back Luis Gonzalez if you want. They can't be optioned, but they can be brought back. So if you want that depth, you do have some possibilities there. And of course, they always want to maintain some space, like I was mentioning, for guys to come up through the system and play there if they deserve it. So Manny says, from a fan experience, what upgrades or changes would you like to see at Oracle Park? I always thought it would be cool to have the lights flashing whenever the Giants hit a home run, for example. I believe the stadium needs to upgrade the fan experience. I agree with you 100%. And you couldn't do the flashing lights when they didn't have the LED lights, but they put in the LED lights a number of years ago and they don't really use them. So the fan experience is stale. And the fact that they're still playing Don't Stop Believin' and they're still playing Lights when the lights go down in the city, like every game is exhausting and ridiculous in my opinion. They like some originality, some new ideas would be more than welcomed. And if you look around the league, a lot of teams use those LED lights, which you can like customize to music even. You can have lights going on and off. You've got when the Braves make a pitching change or when the other team makes a pitching change. I don't know exactly when they do it, but they dim down the lights real dark and then they have them come on to music and stuff. So there's a ton of things they could do. They could make it a little bit louder. It's not a very loud experience, but mostly just come up with some new ideas to engage the fans. I don't know exactly what they need to be, but just playing the same hits from almost 15 years ago now is tired. And man, they really need to. I agree with you. And we need to speak up about this, continue to speak up about it, because clearly they see it as fine to just keep doing the same old thing over and over and over and over again. I couldn't believe it. I don't go to a ton of games, but I just can't believe it when I go and they're still playing like Don't Stop Believin' or When the Lights Go Down in the City. I'm sorry, but that stuff is... Everybody knows when you play a song too much, like on the radio, people get sick of it. Well, can you believe they've been playing the same stuff since 2010 and expect people not to be sick of it yet? I'm going to give credit to Andrew Baggerly. He was the first to kind of write a piece about this year and kind of call out the fan experience. So he kind of got us thinking about it, I think, and it's a good thing. It's kind of the role of the media to call out the truth, even if it's about the experience as opposed to just the players on the field and the performance of the front office and all that. So anyway, that is all the time we have for today. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. Now make your second listen the Locked On MLB podcast. MLB expert Paul Francis Sullivan brings humor, passion, and unique perspective on every team and the biggest stories around the league. Follow the #1 daily league-wide podcast, Locked On MLB, on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get podcasts. Once again, my name is Ben Kaspick. Check me out on Twitter at Ben Kaspick, Kaspick. If you like this show, please smash that thumbs up button, 5 stars, whatever you can do. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. So can't wait to be with you again tomorrow. Giants versus Rockies tonight. We'll have the latest tomorrow. Thanks again for listening. You are now Locked On Giants.